Welcome, everyone. And as you know, I'm Deb Strahanowski, the GFWC International President, coming to you from GFWC headquarters, along with Darrell Jones, our program manager, who's also here with me at the headquarters, your home at 1734 N Street Northwest in Washington. And I just would like to welcome you all to our Power Up Partners Towards Progress, Part 2. Last week was very successful, and I am sure this evening will be as well. We have another very long time standing affiliate organization with us this evening, UNICEF. And we have Katie and Rachel with us, who are, I'm sure, will bring us great information and give us some updates on some of the areas that we have participated in as a GFWC organization in recent months. I know as scheduled, we were to also have Heifer International, but at the last minute, something came up and they are unable to be with us this evening. And we sure hope that we could make arrangements for them to participate and have a webinar with us in the future. So at this time, I would like to turn over and welcome Juliet. Thanks for being with us again, Juliet. And I just want to say that Juliet is the Legislation Public Policy Chairman, and she has a committee of another 7 ladies and members dedicated to our organization from each of our regions. And I cannot tell you how happy and excited and want to thank you for putting your mind together with our program manager, Darrell, and our second vice president, Jolie Frankfurt, in coming and putting this great webinar series together for all of us, the GFWC members. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Juliet, the Legislation Public Policy Chairman. Juliet.
Thank you so much, Madam President. It has been an exciting 5 weeks of webinars, and I know tonight is not going to disappoint anyone because we have an organization that really is on the cutting edge of what's going on in the world and gives us an opportunity to support so many children around the world. So we are excited to have UNICEF here tonight. Just a few housekeeping items. In case you haven't been on any of the other webinars, we would like you to comment in the chat where you are, and that's where you post like casual conversation. If you have questions that you would like us to ask UNICEF at the end of the presentation, please put those in the Q&A. And myself and Jolie will be watching the chat and the Q&A so that at the end we can ask your questions. This is interactive and live. We are recording it. So you will have an opportunity to go back and watch it again. So all of the people that have registered for tonight, next week, will get a link that will let them see the recording. So if you have friends that for whatever reason couldn't get on tonight, but they were registered, they will get a link. And then all of our GFWC members will have the opportunity to watch the entire six-week series after we've finished, and we'll be providing information as to how to view that in our news and notes. And also my committee, like Deb said, has a representative in each of the regions, and we share information with the state presidents, the directors of junior clubs, and the legislative chairs. So there'll be many opportunities for us to push out this wonderful information to the people that haven't joined us tonight. And at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Darrell Jones. He's our GFWC Programs Manager, and he will introduce our speakers tonight.
Thanks, Juliet. Hi, everybody, and welcome again to part 2 of our Partners in Progress webinar. And I just want to say thank you again to UNICEF USA tonight for being here. We really look forward to your presentation tonight. And so I won't hold you guys too long. I want you guys to take up all the time, let our members hear from you. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you guys to Kelly Procida, who is the Assistant Director of Global Cause Partnerships, and Rachel Wista, who is the Director of Policy and Advocacy. And it looks like we have an extra friend with us too. So welcome, guys. I turn it over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And yes, we always love guests on Zoom webinars. So I'm going to share my screen right now and let's see, hopefully this works. Okay. And hold on. And Rachel, just confirming, you can see just the PowerPoint slides, right? Wonderful. So it's such a good evening and it's so wonderful to be here with you all today. I'm just so excited every time we get to be together and, you know, virtually be together. You know, my name, as Darrell just said, is Kelly Procida, and I'm the main partnership focal point here at UNICEF USA for GFWC. And this past year, we joined together with GFWC, and who became the first partner to sign on to the joint investment mechanism. And so, you know, we're going to talk a little bit about advocacy, but I wanted to give a little background to the programs that we're supporting, as well as the ongoing emergencies that some of you have probably been seeing in the news and supporting. And so to get us going first, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the Joint Investment Mechanism, or the JIM, that is our program of support with GFWC, is a new and flexible financing model, which was established by UNICEF and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to accelerate the progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals. You know, this flexible funding model of the JIM really allows UNICEF teams in each country to scale up successful programs, lock in long-term gains from those existing programs, and, you know, and introduce innovative ideas to tackle healthcare and other challenges. And so as you can see here, you know, through this program and through your support, the funds that are raised will go directly towards Kenya, the DRC, and Burkina Faso, focusing on many of those different program areas, from early childhood development, adolescent health and well-being, WASH, which is water, sanitation, and hygiene, social protection, communication for development systems. And it's really, this approach really allows that local ownership of the results and relies on the communities and governments to provide solutions for this. And so really, with GFWC signing on and being the first partner to do so, really leading the way in working towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. And it's really transforming how UNICEF is working with partners and building that trust-based philanthropy for it. So I just wanted to give a little bit background if those are still new to what is the program of support for UNICEF USA. It's a wonderfully new program that's really focused in, and is really the only program that's solely dedicated in UNICEF's portfolio, that solely dedicated to the Sustainable Development Goals. And then I did want to go quickly into UNICEF's response in Ukraine and highlight the amazing impact that GFWC members have had this past year. When the war in Ukraine started, GFWC members really activated, and I know you have a local club there, and so it really hit home for the members. And so, you know, to date, members have helped raise over $73,000, which is really fantastic. And a lot of that has gone to various different programs, which I'll get into. But I just wanted to give you a little bit of stats of where we are right now, as we are 1 year into the war in Ukraine. So as you can see, 17.7 million people are in need in Ukraine, of which 3.3 million of those are children. 5.9 million people are internally displaced within Ukraine. But, you know, with great success, UNICEF has been able to respond and target and support, you know, over 2.3 million children. And a lot of that goes into the various different program areas, from health and nutrition, child protection, social protection, water, sanitation, hygiene, and education. And so continue to share the news, share, you know, fundraise is, you know, always very critical in UNICEF's work. But, you know, UNICEF and all of us here at UNICEF USA are just so incredibly grateful for all your support towards our response in Ukraine. And then to another emergency that many of you have probably seen in the news the past 2 weeks is the earthquake that hit Syria and Turkey. And last week, a 7.7 magnitude earthquake struck while many children were sleeping in Syria and Turkey, which was followed by a second 7.5 magnitude quake, which they have had over 600 aftershocks since then. And this initial earthquake that hit is the most powerful to hit the region in almost 100 years, and really came at the worst possible time for the vulnerable children and families in these areas. Heavy snowstorms are coming, and freezing temperatures are forecasted. And it's been reported by media that an estimated 40,000 people have already lost their lives as search and rescue still continue. So UNICEF, what does that mean for UNICEF? UNICEF teams are currently continuing to undertake assessments and providing emergency support, and really seeing what are the needs on the ground. And just some, key areas of emergency response that UNICEF is doing is water, sanitation, and hygiene. So ensuring affected children and their families have access to safe drinking water and sanitation services. Child Protection Service, UNICEF is working to protect unaccompanied minors or trying to reunite those children that may have been separated from their families. Health and nutrition, so making sure that there's trauma kits and nutrition supplies, such as high energy biscuits, are being delivered as we speak. And then lastly, education. Because of the earthquake, schools have been closed, and so UNICEF is really trying to assess the damage, as well as see how many of them are being used as shelters. I know today the News and Notes newsletter went out with a little blurb about this, and a few GFWC members have already activated and raised funds and donated. So we're really appreciative to that. And if you want to, you can just go to unicefusa.org/givegcp, and you can give right then and there, and really help with those life-saving resources and supplies. And so with that, those are the 3 programs we're currently, talking about in the emergencies. And I think that's really what brings us here today, that as much as we can fundraise and raise awareness, a big part of it is advocating for the world's children. So I really want to pass it over to my colleague, Rachel Wistoff, who will speak a little bit more about, UNICEF's role around advocacy, what are some of our programs that we're advocating for, and then how can you become advocates within your community. So over to you, Rachel.
Thank you, Kelly, and thank you everyone for having us here tonight. It's a pleasure to be with you all. I guess I'll start with the big question, which it seems many of you already know the answer to, given this is the second in the series, but what is advocacy? And specifically, what does advocacy look like for UNICEF USA? So when we look at advocacy, we look at harnessing the power of all of our UNICEF supporters to influence decision makers, so that those decision makers then make policy and funding and budget choices with the world's children in mind. And we always say that it's easy enough for one of us to go to our member of Congress or our mayor or whoever our local representative might be and ask for things, but the world's children, the ones that are most vulnerable, most in need, they don't have necessarily the ability to do that. So we have to be the voices for them. And so with that, when UNICEF USA looks at what kinds of advocacy we do, we look with the following criteria in mind. We look at whether a piece of legislation or a bill is child focused. We look at whether that bill is aligned with UNICEF's global advocacy priorities. And then we also make sure as much as possible that the legislation is bipartisan. We always say, when it comes to children, there are no politics. We shouldn't be thinking about politics. So to go back to UNICEF's global advocacy priorities, UNICEF is currently focused on 4 different priorities. The first is making sure every child is able to survive and thrive. The next is looking at making sure that every child is able to access a quality education. The third one is focused on mental health, making sure that children have access to quality mental health and psychosocial support services, which is kind of a new foray for UNICEF, but much needed. And then the fourth is really focused on climate change, making sure that both youth can be at the center of climate change solutions, but that also programs across UNICEF and across all of foreign assistance are focused on climate adaptation and resilience, so that, you know, when the floods hit, when the earthquakes strike, are the facilities, are the infrastructure built with that in mind to make sure that the recovery is faster? And are the people who are positioned to help also able to consider how to adapt in terms of climate crises? Because we know these aren't going away. So UNICEF is really thinking to the future, because obviously climate change is going to impact children in the world's future the most. And then we at UNICEF USA like to activate all of our supporters, including you now, as a global cause partner within the UNICEF USA philanthropy team. That's of course looking at everybody from grassroots. We have clubs in more than 800 high schools and college campuses across the country, looking at those who are really passionate, particularly youth, so we can walk the walk and talk the talk, making sure that youth themselves are the ones that are influencing decision makers. It also means reaching out to grass tops, those in perhaps positions of power that can also be more influential, whether that's celebrities or, you know, people who have political connections. We look at those individuals too. We work in coalition with many different partners. UNICEF USA is well aligned with many, pardon me, there's also a baby in the background, many of the organizations that you all are probably familiar with: Save the Children, World Vision. We all work very closely in Washington, D.C., because we know there's power in numbers and we can do more good working together. And lastly, we have a strong government affairs team. I'm based out of Washington, D.C., and so we're frequently up on Capitol Hill or talking to our counterparts at the State Department to make sure that they have UNICEF in mind, and again, are really just focusing on the needs of children within the larger decision making. So with that all in mind, I guess I'll pivot to kind of what are our core priorities right now, and what have been the challenges, and then what have been the great success stories, because I want to make sure that you walk away knowing that your voice has power. What you'll see up on the screen here is typically our #1 policy priority throughout the year. That's asking the US government for voluntary support for UNICEF on an annual basis. I think most of you know this, but the UNICEF doesn't receive any UN dues. All of UNICEF's funding comes through voluntary donations, through individuals, through foundations, through corporate partners, and through public sector, so through governments. And the US government has been a long-standing, strong partner with UNICEF. In fact, you know, investments that the US government has made has helped UNICEF bring down the rates of child mortality by nearly 60%. And it's through support from the US government that UNICEF is able to immunize nearly 50% of the world's children every year. So we're incredibly thankful for the US government support. It's been bipartisan support too, which is, you know, in this kind of political reality, tough sometimes. But the fact of the matter is that the need is only growing. And we oftentimes think about children here in the United States, as we absolutely should, in which UNICEF USA is also increasingly focused, but that shouldn't mean that we would look at one portion of population of children at the expense of others. So, you know, we at UNICEF USA are really focused on that support for UNICEF in its most flexible funding, which we call core resources, in order to be able to position ourselves to respond quickly in times of emergency, and in order to be able to innovate, and in order to be able to actually fund some of the humanitarian emergencies that don't always reach the headlines. I know Kelly just spoke about Ukraine and Turkey and Syria, and those are top of mind for us. But the fact of the matter is there are more crises in the world today than ever before, and so many of them are protracted. You think about places like the Democratic Republic of the Congo, which you're helping to support, or South Sudan or Myanmar. And those are places that just don't always get the attention. And so it's with UNICEF's core resources, our most flexible funding, that we're really able to, again, be able to support some of those countries that might not necessarily be receiving donor dollars otherwise. So I think what you're all doing in funding the gym is so well aligned with what we do in terms of advocacy, because again, that allows us to really extend UNICEF's reach and get the best bang for our buck in other terms. So this year, we're asking the federal government and Congress for 175 million for UNICEF. And I guess just as a point of comparison, we did receive a $3 million increase last year, which was fantastic, but that was the largest increase since 2005. So it really is these incremental shifts. I think there's a misconception that foreign affairs is this huge part of the budget. And it's really not. It's less than 1% of the federal budget. So in terms of, talking numbers, UNICEF really does see the need for this 175 million in order to reach children in conflict settings, children impacted by climate disasters, and of course, children who have been impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. The statistics are changing a bit, but between 8 and 10 million children were orphaned by the COVID-19 pandemic. They lost either a primary or secondary caregiver. And you think about those children and the fact that they no longer have perhaps the financial support, the emotional support in order to really thrive in their childhood. So we're seeing increased rates of child labor around the world, increased rates of child marriage. And I know Kelly will speak more to our work on advocacy and child marriage. So it really comes down to being able to fund UNICEF in this way. And I think you all will recognize that while the funding piece is not always the most politically energizing part of all of this, it really is important. So that's why I wanted to start with that. And of course, the success of last year in getting that increase. But that's not all we do. As I mentioned, mental health is an increasing priority of UNICEF, and as such, it is for UNICEF USA too. So we were thrilled that kind of in the year-end funding bill, we saw significant increases for mental health services in schools, which we see as like a primary place for students to be able to access these services. So, I don't have the millions of dollars in front of me, but there were significant increases for those services, and that's something that we advocated for and continue to advocate for. There is also incremental progress on global mental health services. So looking at children that have experienced trauma because of some of these conflicts, perhaps children who had been formerly, soldiers, or children who have been married at an underage. These are children that UNICEF reaches and really wants to provide a full service of packages. As Kelly mentioned, all the sustainable development goals are all interconnected. And so when you're talking about providing nutrition to a child or water, sanitation, and hygiene, there's also ways to integrate mental health into that at very low cost that helps to benefit, entire communities, and is really a strong facet of child protection. Something I think we often take for granted in the United States, because we do have strong social welfare systems and child protection systems, and that's not always the case in countries that UNICEF operates. So, really advocating for something that we called the MINDS Act, Mental Health in International Development and Humanitarian Settings. And that bill is really focused on kind of that global strategy to make sure that mental health is incorporated in foreign assistance. And then the other things we have an eye on this year are certainly climate change. Again, it's not going away. And so we found that our youth supporters, our clubs, our National Youth Council, which is our leadership board, they feel so strongly about climate change and being able to just speak up for the needs of their communities. And so we're really tapping into their voices and listening to them and trying to figure out what is the next step for climate change policy and how can we be a part of that in a very authentic way. And UNICEF, of course, walks the walk there too, looking at how to make sure that different things like the cold chain for immunization equipment and vaccines is solarized. So again, you're not relying on energy sources that aren't sustainable, but you're really looking at things like solar power. And finally, I think Kelly mentioned, we're still continuing to focus on state marriage in the child marriage in the United States, specifically at a state level. There is no federal ban against child marriage, and UNICEF defines child marriage as marriage between anybody under the age of 18. We found that child marriage around the world has a correlation with increased rates of abuse, not finishing secondary school, lack of opportunities, oftentimes for girls who oftentimes find themselves in these marriages. And so because there isn't a federal ban, we work at a state by state level to make sure that there's no child marriage. And we've had a number of great wins. We've seen recently Massachusetts ban a child marriage. We've seen Minnesota and Delaware and New York. So it is happening, but by far child marriage still happens in many states around the country. And so we really look to people like you at the grassroots level to see, identify, is there a bill in my state to ban child marriage? And if there is, can I mobilize supporters to really reach the right people and make sure this becomes a political priority? Because, there's a lot of things out there, a lot of things in the news, and oftentimes it's not. So that's another one that we're looking at because we've seen the momentum and we want to continue to make progress. So Kelly, maybe we'll pivot to the next slide just in terms of how everybody else can take action. Perfect. So the easiest way for you to take action is to visit our Action Center. The address is right there on the screen. It's act.unicefusa.org. And that's where we centralize all of our current policy priorities and allows you to send off a quick email to your members of Congress or your state officials. It also sometimes lets you tweet if you're into Twitter these days. And I know Twitter can be a mixed bag, but we find that a lot of times that's a way to grab elected officials' attention as well. So you'll find an activation there for our FY24, our core resources, which we talked about. You'll find an action on climate change, one on child marriage, one on mental health. So it's really the place for you to explore any sort of topic that might be of greatest personal interest to you and lend your support. And then I would also encourage you all to connect with your elected officials if you haven't already. Oh, pardon me. Before I started at UNICEF USA, I candidly did not connect with my members of Congress very frequently. They always seemed worlds away and just too political for me to be a part of. But in this role, I've come to learn that it really makes a difference to them if you're able to tell your personal story, why you're involved in this organization, why you care about UNICEF USA, because then they're able to see, oh, my constituents, my voters, they feel passionately towards this issue. I wouldn't have known otherwise. And I would say, even if you can't connect to your members of Congress, there's oftentimes great staff at the local level who would be willing to take a meeting or take a phone call. As long as you're polite and have something to say, they're here to serve you. So definitely encourage that. And we do have some resources if you haven't done that before and you'd like to take the next step there. And that third point, just share your story, act locally, think globally. I'm sure many of you do this already, given how strongly committed you are to this cause. But it certainly makes a difference, particularly in this political environment where it very much feels like, everybody needs to think just about what's happening here in the United States, or, it's tough. It's become increasingly tough, I think, to sell members of Congress on the benefits for the world, for us globally, to really invest in children worldwide. But the fact of the matter is it's an investment for our global health security, our national security, and it's a moral imperative. It's the right thing to do. We know children have, rights around the world, and we're here to help support them and help them reach their fullest potential. And I guess the last piece I'll mention is we are looking at setting up some virtual meetings with members of Congress in April. We don't have the full time frame yet, but we don't have necessarily a lot of information to share with you. So that's why it's not up on the screen. But if any of you would like to participate in meetings with Senate offices on any of the issues that we spoke about, please do get in touch with Kelly or I or whomever, Juliet, Deb, because we can make those right connections and help amplify your voices. So thank you all, appreciate it.
Great, thank you, Rachel. And I know firsthand, I have tweeted at, my representatives and they've responded back to me. So, there's definitely power in advocating, and one person's voice can make a change. So thank you so much for sharing that. And I guess we can open it up to questions, Juliet.
So the first question that we had posted tonight was asking whether there was a maximum age for the children served by UNICEF.
Sure. So I'll take that one, and Rachel, feel free to jump in as well. But the main ages is from basically birth to 18, right? So a child is a child until they're 18. And so, but UNICEF has branched out to work with a lot of adolescents because, we do know from even, within the womb, before birth, then birth, then, early age, and then, teenager, but then you need to thrive into adulthood. And, those community members and those individuals, are part of the community and really give back. And, in many situations, we've seen where children have received UNICEF benefits throughout their whole life and then have come back either into their community to become a health worker or a teacher. And so really seeing that full circle, but the ages are 0 to 18.
Another request is if it would be okay, Kelly and Rachel, some members would love to have your email address. So maybe that could be typed in the chat, and then we can also share that with the members since they would like to connect with you. And our President-elect, Sue Ellen Brazil, asked whether UNICEF has asked GFWC to activate our Legislative Action Center on bills. And that is certainly a capability that we have. So as a bill comes to Congress that you want some support behind, you can help us know that, and we can send that out.
Yeah, I know. And I know Darrell and I have connected on this. And so I think that is something that, Rachel and I can work together on and share outside of our own action center, but how can we bring it on to GFWCs and provide different opportunities there?
It'd be great, because if you've posted it on yours, then we can share it on ours, and then it'll really hit Congress, double force. There's a question as to whether either of you or someone from UNICEF would be willing to be a guest speaker at a district convention in California. Is there a way through your website to make a speaker request?
Yes, so not necessarily through our website, but I just put my email into the chat function. So I see it's Kathleen asked that question, I believe. And so Kathleen, feel free to reach out to me and we can figure out how best to either have someone there or virtually come and speak, because I think that's wonderful. District conventions are a great opportunity to bring everyone together and talk about advocacy as well. It might be a nice plug too for the convention, where there will be a lot of advocacy actions as well and conversations.
Yes, you all will be with us in Louisville, Kentucky.
Yes, definitely.
I'm glad that you mentioned the child marriage laws, because on our first webinar that we did on advocacy, we had questions from members about how could they advocate for the end of child marriage. And GFWC does have a resolution on this. And earlier today, I was looking at your website and it said that there are, let's see, I'm going to read out the states that it said have the law. And then the rest of us really have some work to do because we need to take this on in our state. So the website listed Delaware, Massachusetts, Minnesota, New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, and Rhode Island. So we can all applaud them, but obviously y'all need us to do some more work in the rest of the states.
Definitely. And I'll pass it over to Rachel, who can talk a little bit more about it. But I remember when I first came and I was like, there's not child marriage in the United States. Like how could that be? And, you know, doing a little bit more research and seeing that it does actually continue to happen, whether it's, you know, maybe you can't get married at 18, but what's that exception? And so UNICEF and UNICEF USA are really trying to make sure that child marriage is banned completely, no exceptions under the age of 18. But I'll pass it over to Rachel to talk a little bit maybe more about those activations, as well as how maybe some new states that are coming about. Maybe.
No, I can. I'm not the expert on our team in terms of this topic, but I know it's always of interest. And I would encourage everybody to visit unchainedatlast.com if you're interested in kind of knowing your specific state and where progress has been made, or kind of maybe where progress has stalled out. UNICEF focuses on this issue, or UNICEF USA does, because obviously child marriage is a very large problem globally. And we know that girls who marry later in life tend to have better health. Their children have better health outcomes. They receive greater education. Their children receive greater education. It's a positive tool for families, communities, and societies writ large. So this year we have our eye on a bill in Michigan and then one in Connecticut as well. And there are certainly other bills that pop up. The one thing for UNICEF USA is some of these bills are what we call not bright line, which means that there are still exceptions. Maybe they're incrementally a little better, like you had to be 14 before and now you can be 16, but for us it's really it's 18. So we don't always put our full weight behind individual bills, but certainly you can take a look at that website and kind of see where your state is at, and we would love for all of you to support.
Well, I'm not seeing any other questions. This has been a fabulous opportunity to hear directly from UNICEF and get updates on how our members are donating around the world to help Ukraine and to help the earthquake already. It's just fabulous. We can't thank you enough for being here tonight to share that information. And all of you who have attended tonight, I hope you'll register for next week, when the affiliates that we will hear from next week will be March of Dimes and St. Jude's. And Madam President, again, thank you so much for support of this wonderful webinar series, and I'll leave some closing remarks for you.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Thank you both, Kelly and Rachel. This has been a great informative evening. And Darrell and Jolie, thank you for your support of this evening as well. And I see that their emails are in the chat. So members, please reach out. I think your April advocacy with the legislators is a wonderful idea. This is something we also like to do as well, as Juliet and her committee will surely be able to tell you about that. So thank you, members, for being with us again this evening. No matter what type of climate weather you have. Yes, Martha, I will agree that UNICEF does marvelous work all over the world. So I have been listening, but we are so happy with our clubs because they don't only do things in their communities and in their states, but also in the world. And what great thing to have with an organization such as ours. So thank you for being with us. Thank you for being an affiliate organization. And that's been for many, many years, because when I was a young pup, I can remember UNICEF was one of the first projects in my junior club. I'm not going to say what year, but it's been a while. I would say both of you probably weren't born yet, but that's okay. So members, have a great evening. Be looking for all the great information that we have to give you. Don't forget about our Women's History Month coming up in March and our wonderful reception on March 8th. And you know that staff and executive committee members are here for you. Reach out to us at any time. So good evening and thank you for being with us. Bye-bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Thank you so
Bye.
much. Take care.
Bye-bye.